So a couple of tools that makes things easier. This is a saddle jig. It slips over the pipe. You line it up. So if you want your pipe, if you know your centers, you might cut your pipe 3/4 of an inch too long, because you're going to cut 3/4 of an inch out of that, basically, pretty close to 3/4. So, and then you're going to grind it up. So you're going to lose 3/4 of an inch. So if your other pipe's out here and you know what your measurement's going to be, it's going to be 2 3/8, which is an inch and what is that, 3/16. So you're going to be, your center of your other pipe's going to be about 1 1/4 past that. So you want to do that math. And then another tool that's really handy, this is a center punch, or they called it a center head. So you can rotate the dial, the little level in there, for 90 degrees or 45 or whatever you'd like. So what you can do with this, and the reason this is important, is you find your center here, right there. You take a center punch or a hammer and you give it a tap. Okay, so it's got a little center punch, and I'll show you this in a minute. I want to get that right back in there. Okay, so it moved just a hair when I tapped it. I should have clamped it down on the vise. So I got it in the center punch and I got it level again. I'm going to go to the other end and put another one down there. And the reason I'm doing this, it's going to make sense in a minute. Okay, now if you want to get fancy with that a little bit, or keep from losing the mark on the rust, take a little soapstone and circle your little mark, because you can lose them pretty easy. Okay, now I'll get back to why I did that. And this is magnetic, so it gets all the grinding filings on it. I try to keep it somewhere that's a little cleaner. You can see my mark. So now I can take my pattern, match it up with the ends, split that dot, that center punch mark in that gap. Make sure it's on there tight. And it don't matter if the pipe moves now because it's marked. Okay, I'm pretty close to even, so I can mark that and roll it around and mark the other side. And these are handy because you can mark a 22.5 or a 45, and you can cut 22.5 or 45s or saddles on one little piece. And they make these up to 4 and 5 and 6 inch. So they're super handy. So you know my dot. Now, so this has to be orientated the same as the other way. And that's what that dot allows. So now we're on the other end, and we're going to work that out. We're going to get that lined up with the end, split that dot in that crack right there, and then we know we're lined up with the other end. I should take a minute and sharpen my soapstone. It's a little dull, but it's probably as good as I can cut that with a Plasmark anyway. And we'll go over some of, as I use new tools, I'll try to go over them a little bit, and then if you have questions, feel free to ask. So I did, if you noticed, I welded my ground strap on that piece of pipe right there, because this rusty pipe, it's tough to get a ground, and it's not worth grinding everything all the way up, cleaning it up. It's too time consuming for old pipe. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I like my little flange wizard because it's magnetic And it's got the center punch that goes up and down for different sizes of pipe. But it's not the only way to do it. So you could take a piece of angle iron, put it on your pipe. If it's a long piece of angle iron, as long as your pipe, you can just make a mark and walk up to the other end and make another mark, and you have the same thing as the two dots. Or if you don't have a long piece of angle iron, you take a piece of scrap and you can level it with your torpedo level, and you can make a mark, and you can walk down angle iron, put it on there, level it, and you got a mark. Okay, so that works too. So there's many ways to do everything. Just pick out the way that works best for you. So the one thing I really like about this little center head is you can roll it up here on 0 and put it on the side of the pipe and center punch that on the side. So we're just going to make a mark where we think that would be, and this is why this is important. When you cut a 45-degree angle in a chop saw, and then you slide the pipe through, and you want to cut another 45-degree, maybe the other direction, well, then you have to take the pipe out and turn it around, and it don't necessarily clamp in right, but to clamp it, to cut it the same direction, all you have to do is roll that pipe over 90 degrees and make the same cut. So what you get is the two halves of the 90 without swapping the whole piece of pipe in the saw. And most saws only cut one direction. So people may have known that. It's really an easy way to do is to mark that center, and then you cut one direction with the saw but make two different angles. We might get to that later, or I might edit that out. We're going to make these notches with a ESAB plasma cutter, and I've already welded on a ground because this pipe's so rusty I have a hard time getting a ground. So let's see what we did with this plasma cutter. The plasma cutter has 220 volt electricity, same as a welder, and it has air pressure and an air filter, and that's just a paper cartridge filter similar to a roll of toilet paper. Plasma cutter has a torch, and it just works on air and electricity. There's no gas, so it's economical to run, but this is just the torch. If you push the button, it turns on cooling air, and that air helps keep this cool, and it may do something to cool the steel too. That typically the steel doesn't get super hot when you cut with a plasma cutter. We're going to cut that rusty old steel with a plasma cutter. That blows for just a second, and then it cools off the tip, and then it shuts off. So okay, so it's shut off now. Okay, got a pretty nice cut there, but you can see it's a little jagged. So I want to take my grinder, I'm just going to kind of touch this a little bit this way and this way, clean off the slag on the inside, and then while I'm at it, I'll clean the rust off around the exterior of the weld. I'm not going to worry about it fitting super perfect. Main thing is, you just get the slag out of there and clean the rust up. And when I butt that up to weld it, a little bit of gap here and there doesn't hurt nothing. It just gets you good penetration on the weld. The other thing I wanted to say is, when you use the plasma arc or the welders and you get everything all fit up and you weld for, say you weld for 20 minutes on pretty hot, when you're done, just don't shut your welder off. Let it keep running. The internal cooling fans cool that stuff down, and it's better to let it cool down before you turn it off than just let it be really hot and then shut it off, and then that heat transfers to places that shouldn't get hot. So you want to take care of your equipment, let the cooling fans do their job, let them cool that machine off before you shut the off switch. It should save you later. So that's ground up. Now you can see the fit on that. Yeah, I mean, it fits pretty good. It's a little, there's maybe 1/8 of an inch gap there. About the same, no more than 1/8. And an 1/8 gap actually just gives you a good place to weld. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. Now, this is the piece that's going to go between my two bottoms. So it's going to be 3 of them, one on each end, one in the middle. And then I'll weld the top of them. I'll drag it outside, flip it over, drag it back in, weld that, and then that's the subframe for my storage rack. So I'm not going to film cutting each one of these. You've already seen that. So the next time you see this, we'll be getting ready to tack these up. Feet 1 inch. 31 feet 7/8 of an inch. It's about 1/8 of an inch off. I think we're pretty good. That's good enough. Pretty good weld. dirty, take your time, float that rust out. That's really when I want to leave my welder on and let it cool off. It's worked pretty hard, generated some heat. Probably more important in the summertime when it's 90 degrees. But anyway, I always let it cool off. Give it a few minutes. I cornered the frame and it was 1/8 of an inch out of square. Good enough. It's going to warp a little bit. Probably going to bend when I flip it over. Now we're going to take it outside, flip it over, push it back in, and I can weld the other side, and then we'll start working on the walls. Thanks. Please subscribe.